Shane,
Mm.
welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for having a conversation with me. Where are you phoning in from?
Honestly, it's such a pleasure, Matthew. I'm phoning in from Shanghai in China, so only a few hours difference from you.
Fantastic. So, what time is it over where you are?
It is 5:45 in the
Nice
evening.
one. So, this is kind of dinner time, isn't it?
Exactly. This is perfect. And it's good for me because I do another little live stream podcast, but my co-host is in the US, which is opposite side of the world. So this is very good time. Nice to be
Yeah.
speaking to someone in a similar time zone.
Yeah, I mean, the Australian time zone is a little bit tricky. I do a lot of podcasts with people back home, well, back in England. See, I still say back home
Yeah.
at goodness knows what hours in the morning and also the US. But it's nice to have someone kind of in that kind of geographical location that you are, because it means one of us is at least both of us are awake and not trying to fumble through
Yes.
questions. So I really appreciate it. Shane, quite possibly the most important question for our conversation. What's your coffee order and what's the coffee culture like over in China?
Okay, two good questions. So first, my general coffee order, I'm afraid, is just a simple black Americano.
No problem
That's
with
what
that.
a coffee. Unless I'm like really need comfort, then a nice cappuccino would be good in the morning. But I'm blessed at Shanghai. So trivia for you, Shanghai has more coffee shops than any other city in the world, which no
Fantastic.
one quite would realize because China's famous for tea, not coffee. But Shanghai as a city has got this interesting coffee culture that goes back 100, years and has lots of independent coffee shops everywhere. So you are really spoiled for choice. In fact, I had a friend who came over from Melbourne the other month, and they love they're very proud of their coffee
They
culture
sure
there,
are, yeah.
and they even got the Melbourne approval. So how
Oh,
about them?
have hipsters made it to Shanghai? Is there a lot of coffee shops with distressed wood?
Every coffee shop is uncomfortable to sit in.
It sounds just like Melbourne and Sydney, so I'd feel right at home. What about a book, Shane, that has caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life? Could be within your area of expertise, which we'll get into shortly, or it could be more
Hmm.
broadly than that.
It's a good question. It's an easy one for me because there was a very pivotal book that came up in my career actually, and I have it here. It's called Putting Staff First, and it's by Johnny Utley and John Thompson. And when I came across this book, and I was at the time, it was early when I was in a system level role, like across a group of schools, running teaching development. And I came across this book, and it was one of the first times I'd heard someone say out loud, the job of a leader is not to put students first. And I was like, what? It's to put staff first. Because and it talked about if you put students first, it will inevitably, if you're not careful, end up at the detriment of your staff, who then won't be able to put those students first anyway. So you need to put them first so that they can do their best to look after their students. And ever since then, that was really transformative to the way I've approached a lot of
Wow.
my work since.
Wow, I'm sure we'll get into that. I can almost imagine the people listening to that gasping because you're just not taught that, are you? But I can't wait to unpack that. Something that
Mm.
you've changed your mind about. Could be professionally, could be personally. Yeah.
Well, I'm lucky that in my role I get to change my mind all the time,
Good.
and a lot of people know me as being quite annoyingly tentative on conclusions to things. So there's a lot of mind changing. I actually think the whole world needs to get a little bit less sure of itself at the minute, and I think it would help if people were a bit more comfortable changing their mind. But I guess it would be that moment. I would take it back to that book and that idea actually of in my world of putting students first and having that as your headline all the time can unintentionally
Mm,
actually be at the detriment of those very people you're trying to serve.
mm,
And that was like a real mind-blowing moment that's
mm.
really kind of changed everything I do since.
Amazing. And final kind of getting to know you question, if you don't mind, Shane. What's the best piece of
Mm.
advice you've received and who is it from?
So you will resonate with this very well, Matthew, because just before the call we were talking about your podcast, and so I'm also a podcast. I have a podcast called Education Leaders, which has been going for just over 3 years,
Yeah, well,
and
it's
the
great, by the
best.
way. It comes up on my feed, and it's a great podcast. So congratulations.
Well, you're too kind. Well, it links to the best piece of advice is that when I was in my previous role and I was thinking of like, oh, wouldn't it be good to start a podcast? And I worked with a guy in my office. We got on very well called Elliot. We're still brilliant friends. And he just said, just
Mm.
start. Like, don't like, because I can be a bit of a perfectionist and want to just kind of get it right and make sure I've got all the tools and the right microphone and the right setup and I need to
Right.
kind of do my research. He said, just start. And your first episodes, doesn't matter if they're a bit crap or whatever, but start. That is the hardest bit. And do you know what? He was so right. I reckon we've got a
Mm.
similar story there, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like I really do. And I remember sitting down with quite a prominent educational leader. I asked him to lunch when I was considering starting the podcast, and he said that too. He said, just start, just have a go. And I think I read somewhere that most podcasts failed after 5 episodes, so I recorded
Yeah.
six and released them all in one go. So we got over that first hurdle. And I think that is really good advice. Start and do it scared. And I was petrified and I thought, who on earth am I to ask these people to come on a podcast and have a conversation? What could I possibly contribute? And then I realized that people are actually not listening to me. They're listening to the experts that I have the privilege of speaking to. And so yeah, I think that's really good advice. Is there anything else in your life that you are considering or wanting to just start, but you've put off? Are you learning a new hobby? Yeah, is there something that you're like, oh, I should really just start that?
Well, yes, there's lots of things. Hobbies
Same.
are one of those real challenges where I just want to do more and just feel like I didn't have time. And actually recently I did do a just start and I started a hobby of wood carving, which so I live in a little Shanghai apartment and but I also have always had a dream. I came from like a working class house in the UK. And my dad was always in the garage making stuff, right? And I want to do that. I want to potter in a garage and make stuff and do stuff. But in a Shanghai apartment, your tiny little shoebox doesn't really lend itself to that. So when I came across, I saw these guys making these little carvings with a little knife, and I thought that's something I can do. I can do that at my dining table. So I started my little wood carving or whittling hobby. But no sooner had I started actually, and then the other week you won't be able to see, but I stabbed myself in the hand six stitches
Right.
after half, which so that kind of put a little halt to that hobby. So we'll get the stitches out at the weekend and wear gloves and
Yeah.
continue the hobby.
I think that is a great piece of advice. So just start, but sometimes do it slowly and don't get too ahead of yourself. I think that's great
Exactly.
advice. So
Yeah.
Shane, for those people that are not aware, you're an author, you're a podcaster, you're an organizational coach. There's so many different words that we could use to describe the amazing work that you do. How would you describe what you do? What are some of those sort of key words or key metrics that you associate with your job, if you can call it that? How would you describe what you do?
Yeah, a hodgepodge or whatever. So, like, one, I'm not very good at marketing. So, yeah, getting your, what do they call it, a elevator pitch right is something I'm still not very good at. But so I work mainly in the leadership space. That's an area that I think is super important and has such a massive impact into schools. And there's kind of two areas that I really work in. I work a lot with schools on change, on navigating change, on working through implementation, working specifically on sustainable change, change that actually lasts beyond a
Mm,
couple of years, and change that doesn't make teachers roll their eyes. I always say to people, I think teachers are some of the rolliest eye profession of there is. And I think it's understandable because you get put through so much that makes you roll your eyes and makes you go, what is this? And I've seen this before. So I work with schools on how do you do sustainable strategy, sustainable change. And then alongside that, I also find that sometimes for schools wanting to work on a change or leaders wanting to work on a change, but actually they're cognitively overloaded day to day so that they can't even get to that. So then I work more individually with leaders, or I have my own cohorts of leadership programs that I run for people who they can kind of work on some tools and strategies that can reduce their cognitive overload in
mm.
their day to day to free them up to be able to do those bigger changes that they want to do.
Yeah, that I have so many questions, Shane. That sounds like such a incredibly important and amazingly complex area to be in. How do you define leadership? And what are some of the qualities of some great school leaders that you've had the privilege of working with?
Oh gosh, yeah, the million-dollar question. So it depends where you are. This is one of the, I think, the biggest challenges of leadership is that there is no one type of leader who is
Mm.
great or one type of leadership action that works because it depends on what situation you're in. If you're in an organization that is very established, very old, maybe a traditional old British school, for example, that's 300, 400 years old, that's been, well, that's going to take a certain type of leader. If you're in a school that is, for example, an international school in China, that enrollment numbers have gone down for the last 3 years because there's been a big demographic shift, and you're in a bit of a frantic situation where you're worrying about keeping the school open, then that's going to need a slightly different leader. So I'm a bit cautious about leaning into what is the kind of leader you want to be. But what I would say is, in my experience, the best leaders seem to share one particular characteristic, and that is that they are expert communicators. And that means two things. They're good at speaking and making sure that their spoken or their writing is clear and is motivating and inspiring or whatever it needs to be. But also the other side, which is that they are just incredible listeners and that they're able to really key into their community and listen well and actually do something with what they listen to. I
Yeah.
feel like those things, regardless of the situation, are super important.
Yeah. Do you have any advice, Shane, on how we become better listeners? I feel like this is great relationship advice. It's something my wife has been trying to get me to do for many years. But how do we listen better? Because we live in a very noisy world, don't we, where there's so much coming at us, and the nature of school leadership is so intense. There's so much input. How do we get better at slowing down and actually listening?
Yeah. Well, there's a load of things we can do. And I think one that comes to mind maybe links to the challenge you have with your wife, the challenge I have with my wife, and the challenge many relationships would feel like they have. So it's funny, like I get complimented quite kindly, as do you probably with your podcast. I assume with the way you question and listen, that, oh, Shane, you're a good listener. But yeah, at home, I don't think I am as good a listener. And I think there's challenges there. But I think that speaks to something is that
Mm.
I think when you are listening, you have to turn on listening mode. And I think you have to lean in and not go, this is just a natural state.
Yeah.
But to truly listen to someone, you have to go, do you know what? I have to remove my emotions. I have to suspend my judgments. I have to lean out slightly, almost come away from the conversation slightly so I can listen to your words. And I think that's why actually we struggle to listen to the people we're closest to because we're too invested in that situation and that
Yeah.
relationship. It makes it incredibly difficult
Yeah.
to listen. Whereas if I've got a coaching client,
Yeah.
well, and maybe that, they're not really, the impact of what happens to them is not massively going to change my life or my world, then I'm able to take a bit of distance, which helps me just to cue in to what they're saying. So it's like a strategic move. I don't know if that makes much sense.
Yeah, it really does. I feel I'm quite emotionally invested in the conversations I have with those that are closest to me. And so
Yeah.
a comment or a can quite often not feel like an accusation always, but can feel quite personal. And so I think that's really important. And I've one of the things I've tried to do in my role is to listen more. And I think the reason why I started this podcast as well is because I thought if nobody listens, if it's an absolute disaster, at least I'll get better at listening. And so it's been a wonderful experience. And I think what you're saying about just slowing down, removing yourself slightly or stepping back is incredibly important and incredibly meaningful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you have to work out what am I listening for in this moment? So something that I learned, which was really interesting. So I'm in the coaching space a lot, and I think of myself as a coach and I coach people, or I even coach teams and organizations. When I'm listening in a coaching situation, there is a clear purpose when you're coaching. It's to listen, it's to interrogate their thoughts, it's to allow them to go deeper in their thinking. So there's a real imperative that I listen so closely, otherwise I'm going to miss something that allows them to elaborate. But there's actually other places where you listen for a different reason. For example, maybe someone comes to you as a leader who has just had a really difficult time at home and they've asked just for a listening ear. Well, in that
Yeah.
moment in time, you're not going to be listening hard to help them deepen it. You're just going
Yeah.
to be listening to empathize and say, I hear you and I'm
Yeah.
with you. Or you're a podcaster like we are. And in that case, you're not listening to coach. It would be weird. It'd be a bit weird if you were inviting people on your podcast and then going, okay, I heard you said that. Don't you think? Would you, can we explore this? What would you do next? No, because when you're listening as a podcaster, you've got two ears. You're listening to the person in front of you, but you also know that you've got a listener who's wanting value out of that conversation. So you
Mm.
can't indulge yourself too much. You've also got to keep thinking of like this value triangle that is there's
Mm.
someone else listening in. So listening as a skill actually just shows up so differently in different places. And sometimes you've got to be able to lean into those different modes.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And one of the things I've learned about conversations with my wonderful wife is she quite often doesn't want me to fix it. She doesn't want advice. She just wants me to
Yeah.
listen. And so I hadn't actually until I began doing a bit of a deep dive into your work, I actually hadn't thought about the different aspects and elements of listening before. And it was really interesting, I think, to start to think about the different types of listening skills that we have to develop, not only as decent human beings, but also as educational leaders. Shane, your book, Change Starts Here. Why write this book?
So that's a one that me and my co-author Ephraim, we played around with a lot because there are already a lot of books on implementation, a lot of books on leading change. So why write another book? Well, first, we didn't intend to write a book at all. We just
Yeah.
started writing notes and things down. And as these things, in fact, me and my co-author Ephraim, he's from Australia actually. He's done the opposite to you. He was born in Melbourne and now he's in London. We actually, when we wrote the book, we'd never met each other in person. We
Right.
wrote the whole thing online just through developing an online relationship. But it was
Wow.
when we were writing it, what we found is that there are a lot of change models out there that say how to do a change, and they always start from the same place, which is what do you want to change?
Yeah.
And then they take you through a process
Yeah.
of how to make that happen. Now, we found that in many situations we came across that seemed to be flawed. Because what if the change you've picked isn't the right change to do at
Great
all? It
question.
feels like you're like missing a whole section before. So our book decided to kind of zoom back and gone, well, actually, the first question you should ask with a change isn't what do we want to do and then go forward. We have to take a few steps back and go, well, is this the what is the thing we want to affect first? What
Mm.
is this challenge we see in front of us? Is that the right challenge? Do we all agree on this challenge? And we need to go on a journey to get to them. And there's a biggest reason is that if you start with, and you'll have seen this, Matthew, right? You start with an idea of this is what we're going to change. There is only one way forward. And the only way forward is to go on a journey of what people call generating buy-in from a
Yeah.
team
Yeah.
because they're not bought in. So you have to buy them in. And that already sounds like a manipulative act, doesn't it? Like I'm going to
It
buy you in.
does.
I'm just going to
Yeah.
you just need to get on board with what I want. And I'm going to use every tactic in my arsenal to bring him by doing all the different things. Well, if it's the wrong change, if they're not bought into the why before, then you're going to have a really hard time. But
Mm.
what if they understood why you were wanting to do this thing? What if they understood the fundamentals that were challenging at the minute? And if they understood and if they'd agreed on a goal with you before you decided what you were going to do, if your community said, hey, I'm aligned on this goal, maybe it's going to be a bit easier later
Mm.
to get that buy-in, if you
Yeah,
like.
that's a great point. And you argue that most school initiatives fail because they overlook human
Mm.
elements. What do you
Mm.
think leaders are most commonly missing? And why do these human elements matter so much? Why do we fail to take them into consideration?
I love that question, and it's one that I have a lot of empathy for. So first, on your first point, a lot of change fails. We know, like from big McKinsey studies, for example, across organizations, not just schools, that 70% of change doesn't last.
Mm.
70%. And actually, if you go into schools and look at work by, for example, Dr. James Mannion, who's done some great work on change, he would say 95 of change doesn't last beyond a couple of years in schools. This is insane. Like if you even just
Insane.
look in the UK, how much money is spent on professional development a year. It's in the UK, it's £1 billion. If you then go, okay, £1 billion, but 90 to 95% of that isn't actually making an impact, that is just a colossal waste of money, waste of time. There's something going wrong. And for us in our work and our research looking into this, we were coming across time and time again that it was that human element that seemed to be missing. And the reason I have a lot of empathy for it is because change is really hard. It is like really, really hard. And it's hard for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons that makes it so hard is that humans naturally resist change. It is like our default stance. It's a threat response, right? Like if
Yeah.
someone says something, we're going to do something different. Our natural instinct is not to just embrace change. We're not programmed that way. So if that is the natural stance, then whenever you are introducing a change, it's going to be a challenge. So
Mm.
what can be so easy to do is to try and dehumanize the process, because as leaders we've got so much in our head, so many things we have to do. So in order to cope with that, to cope with the challenge, we codify, we put things into clear policies, we bring things really down into a small controllable actions that we can take, and it feels all of a sudden we're in control because we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We've done our school development plan, and these are the 10 actions
Mm.
that are going to lead to it. These are the dates, and this is what we're going to do. And it feels all tidy, and we get to tick it off as we go. But as we find nearly every time something happens, the human element causes conflict, and we don't know what to do with that. And what most happens when that challenge comes from other humans rejecting what you do or things falling apart is you go, this didn't work, let's try something else.
Mm.
And the cycle continues.
Yeah. Tell me about the double diamond model. Why is that
Hmm.
so important? And what can we learn from that process as school leaders?
So in our book, when we were generating, how do we help schools to slow down a little bit in their thinking so that they're not just jumping from, I've got an idea, here's a change,
Mm.
and let's get everyone on board. We knew we needed to find a model that would slow it down. So we could have created our own model, but I think there's too many models in education. Every person has a model
There's a
and a
lot.
cycle or what. It's everywhere. So, and we were advised to make a model because God forbid you write a book without having your
Without
own
one.
model
Yeah.
there as well. But we didn't. We went looking, and I actually was having a coffee with Ola Hanford in Shanghai, who is a lecturer at university in design thinking. And while we were just chatting over a few different things, she showed me this double diamond model, which comes from the British Design Council. And for people listening in to this, easy to visualize. Imagine two diamonds next to each other. And the idea is you go from left to right. You start at the beginning of a change and then with the double diamond, you go wide. That's why it's a diamond. And then you contract.
Mm.
You go expansive with your thinking, then you contract, divergent, convergent thinking, right? So in a design world, this would be quite simple. So you'd have an idea, you'd have a challenge that you wanted to solve. You'd go open and you go, well, what are the different things that we could solve? And then you would come together and go, well, what do we want to? What are we actually going to solve? And then you would go wide again and say, how are we going to do it? And then you would come together and go and say, well, this is how we will do it, right?
Mm.
So you're going wide and we just fell in love with the simplicity
Great.
of this model. It's a wonderful model. So we thought, this is actually how change works, and it's a very coach-like manner as well of exploration and making
Yeah.
decisions, exploring and a decision. So diamond's a really nice way to do that. And what we found is that if you can imagine the little points between the diamonds, there's three stages of a change. So the beginning of a change is always a perceived challenge. This is where someone thinks this is a challenge, and it's always a perception because it's usually one person or a small group of people who identify a particular challenge. It might be a leader, it could be a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be a student even who identifies a challenge. And then at some point in the middle of the process, that gets turned into a goal. And then at some point, that goal gets turned into a solution at the very end of the change. And
Mm.
what we were really fascinated about specifically was that bit between when you get a perceived challenge and you turn it into a goal. And how
Mm.
can we make that process as rigorous as possible so that you arrive at a really wholesome community-led goal that everyone feels, yes, this is a thing we want to work on. And then you can move through that more traditional change process towards your solution from there. But
Yeah.
getting through that first diamond is so important. So if you can Google it, if you search like double diamond model, you'll see loads of stuff on it. Like it's been written
Yeah.
about a lot in design thinking. And we've just kind of added a couple of words to it that just make it a little bit more
Yeah.
relevant to change in schools.
Yeah, it's so incredibly simple. I mean, my background is as a kindergarten teacher, so I love it when we take these big concepts or these seemingly complex concepts and make them really simple. And the double diamond model really stood out to me for that. It's incredibly simple. How do like school leaders are incredibly busy. I'm thinking about my day today. I think I got to have lunch at about 3:30 in the afternoon and I don't think I went to the bathroom once. Like it is just it's
Yeah.
busy and no one is denying how hard school teachers and school leaders work. It is just an incredibly complex and challenging environment. But how do we begin to distinguish meaningful change from activity and from busyness? How do we begin
Mhm.
to untangle that? How do we know if we're being effective or if we're just busy and just spinning the wheels?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could come at that from a few different ways, I think. I think
Mm,
one, you could just look at it from an emotional angle. If, often when people talk about teacher burnout or this kind of thing, sometimes the mistake can be to quickly go onto time and going, how do we save a bit more time? How do we give them an extra hour back or something like that? And sometimes it's not the time at all that is the problem. It's that the teacher doesn't feel the sense of purpose behind these silly
I
activities
think
that they're
that's
being
important. Yeah.
asked to do. And that is brutal on our energy levels. So often, like a school can jump with well-being, or it's same with leaders to go, oh, we just need to give an extra bit of time. And that is not what has to be done. It's actually about kind of re-articulating that. So a perfect example, you some of the schools where well-being is at highest from all their staff are not necessarily schools that have just reduced workload of everyone. Sometimes they're the busiest schools where teachers are just
Mm,
really intensely busy, but that teachers and leaders all understand why we're doing what we're doing and are so behind it that it gives them the energy to be able to do that. And I think it's that why question that is one of the biggest mistakes we can make if we're feeling in the moment that we are doing, and we're not fully able to articulate at any point why we're doing it. Well, that's probably a telltale sign that something's wrong and where energy needs to be rearticulated. And this is why, as a leader, I think it's really useful to build in time to stop, to go back to the beginning and go, what are the things we actually want to achieve? What are we trying to do here? And how are these things that we've got running serving that mission? And just getting the time to do it, because otherwise schools just add things, don't they? I don't know if you have read the book. You've probably spoken to these people so Aaron Hamilton, John Hattie, and Dylan William
yeah.
wrote Making Room for Impact, right?
Yeah.
All about de-implementation. And I just think, although it's a thick book, like I don't recommend everyone to read it. It's a bit of a tome, I think they called it, an academic
Mm,
tome. It's a lot of work, but the concept of de-implementing and working out what you need to
yeah.
do less so that you can invest in better
It's
things to do well. Oh, so powerful.
it's so important. And John Hattie was my master's supervisor down at the University of Melbourne, and
Well, there you go.
he was the
Amazing.
yeah he was the person that told me to just start. So I had a conversation with him over dinner, and he said just start, and I'll come on. And if you go back to the first season of the podcast, his is that episode that as you listen to it, you can hear the dishwasher in the background going. And he's a wonderful example of just the amazing, same as Dylan William as well, like just the incredible generosity of our profession. And so many things give me hope about teaching. And one of them is just how kind and generous people like yourself are to come and have a conversation with me about these issues that really matter. So I think it's an incredible book as well. I have read it. It's a very long book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's
What an amazing journey. And And
It's crazy.
don't you just find these people you speak to, like Matthew, all these incredible, that's what gives you energy, obviously. And you're
Mm.
doing this extra work, you're doing it after school and all in these places. Like, many people would go, why are you doing that? Just taking
Yeah.
on this extra. But the chances are that energizes and gives you purpose to the rest of what you do.
But I think you're so right, and that idea of seeing the purpose behind what we do. I mean, you have been podcasting for years. I mean, there are plenty of other things you could be doing, but I think you've got to follow the thing that energizes you and the thing that you find meaning. And for me, the fact that we can have this conversation and it be broadcast in the ears of countless people with no extra effort from me, and hopefully invest something into a profession that we both feel so deeply about is an incredible privilege to be able to steward these conversations in a way that makes a difference. I think about what I was like in my first year of teaching, and I sat through all of this professional learning and all of this stuff, and I remember sitting in these lectures thinking, but what does that actually mean for me when I get up in
Mm.
front of my classroom tomorrow? What does it actually look like? How is this conversation going to impact my kindergarten class tomorrow when Sally's lost a shoe or Johnny's vomited, or like how is it going to make a difference? And I think your point about we can survive a lot when we have a meaning and a purpose behind it, can't we? I think that's so amazingly important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it links back to like that earlier point we were talking about, is like why change is hard, and that human messiness of schools. I always say schools are just so messy because they're full of different human beings. And that's also what makes a school so beautiful, right? You've got such a diverse group of human beings all hodgepodged
Mm,
into this thing we call a school. And the thing that we try to do sometimes as a leader is to standardize that so we can understand it a little bit
mm,
and then be able to influence it. And yet, that's a very counterintuitive, because you've
yeah.
got different people with different needs and different understandings. And never mind, every teacher comes to teach it for a slightly different reason. Don't assume that all teachers are in there because they just had a love of children since a young age, or all teachers are in there because they're just pedagogues and they just love the research, or you know all teachers have this slightly different story of what
Mm,
brings them in. And I think a school leader or someone who is in a leadership position, one of your biggest jobs is to understand why you're here, what makes you tick. And sometimes that's going to involve a few counterintuitive plays. Like, for example, that teacher who says, I'm going to start a podcast. And you go, can't really see how that's going to, I'm worried you're going to be doing something that's going to tire you out. It's not going to be very good for here, and you could discourage it. Or you could encourage it and let that happen and see if that allows them to
mm,
bloom, and is those ways you can support it. I know a I I know a teacher, a friend who was in a school, and he started doing amazing things, producing these wonderful, wonderful work, putting it out in the world. Actually, he was very good at kind of consolidating. So, and he loved the research and he was very passionate. And his school didn't like that. And they said, I think you're getting distracted. We want you focused on this school. You need to stop with this social media stuff. And the school thought they were doing that, and that was going to bring him into the school and make him focus. It did the exact opposite. He left the school the next year because it wasn't a fit for him. And I think
mm.
this is, sometimes we think we're doing the right thing by trying to mold people into a shape. And sometimes actually you have to go, I'm not managing an AI team here. I'm managing a human team. And therefore I need to lean into their humanity. And that's a little bit messy, and that's kind of okay.
Yeah, I think that's wonderfully important, Shane. Shane, what were you like at school? And was there a teacher that made a difference in your life?
Great question. So, what was I like at school? Well, I was painfully shy at school.
Okay.
Um,
You
to
you would never think that speaking to you now. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was painfully shy to the point where my mum and dad were going to be getting me into the doctor. They were that worried, about. I was the kid who got invited to birthday parties and just would be terrified at the idea and just would do anything to get out of going to a party, or that kind of thing. And so that was me through the whole of primary school. And when I got to secondary school, it links to the teacher actually, because I am that classic teacher story who had a teacher who literally changed their life. And I had a teacher, she was a Scottish teacher, Miss Marshall was her name, and she was, strict, quite a strict teacher, funny, humorous, but for Aberdeen she was, and she's a really wonderful teacher. And she just said to me when I got into the school, right, who's going to play an instrument? And she said, Shane, you're going to play an instrument. And I'm like, God, crikey. And I said, okay. And I said, can I play a saxophone? She said, no, you're going to play the cornet. She told me that, and she gave me this cornet, and then created a space where she'd seen us. I was a shy person. And then all of a sudden, I had a space at lunchtime where I didn't need to feel the pressure of being out in the playground, where I could go into the music room and practice my instrument. And in that moment, I found other people who didn't much like talking to each other much, but were quite happy to run the bow over a violin, or make a racket with a big tuba or whatever it was. And we played music together, and that formed my social confidence at school, and is where it transformed my ability, because of a teacher who saw
Wow.
me, gave me an opportunity, and yeah, and then
Mm.
really I developed that confidence. I would have never thought, for example, I'd have been podcasting or keynote speaking or doing anything like that now. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was pivotal.
That's really beautiful. And how did the teacher's classroom make you feel? How did it feel when you were in that space?
That is a good question. So I think that it was safety. I felt very safe in that space. And I think it wasn't because it was a space where I could just do whatever I want. It was quite a strict space. Maybe that also helped. There was none of the bullies around, or I couldn't get, there was no people taking the mick. I was in a safe space with other people who were doing the same thing. So it was safety. I guess Amy Edmondson would say it was a psychologically safe space for us to just be, to make mistakes, to grow and to learn together.
I love that. And I've asked that question 265 times to every single guest that I've had. And from these educational researchers to everyday teachers to leaders to keynote speakers, and no one has ever mentioned content, which I think is really interesting. It's not a surprise, but it's a
Mm.
reminder, I think, that I mean, the teacher that changed my life, Mrs. Jones, I had the privilege of interviewing her for the podcast, and I have no idea what this woman taught me. No idea. Like, I currently supervise the age that I was in her class, so I knew there would have been some equilateral triangles or not narrative writing or ancient history in there. There would have been something, but I have no idea what this wonderful woman taught me. But I remember how a classroom felt, and every single person, like I said, that I've spoken to through the duration of this podcast has talked about what the learning environment felt like, and it's really wonderful. And even so, we're probably the same age, but so many years after school, it's really interesting to see your face light up and your voice almost get a little bit, dare I say, emotional talking about
Hmm.
that experience. It's incredibly beautiful, and I think it's a reminder of the amazing, amazing work that teachers do every day, and that content, while it's important to be content experts, kids aren't going to remember what you taught them. They're going to remember how they felt
Yeah,
when you walked through their door, which I think it's a really great reminder. Yeah.
it is, isn't it? Although I like almost have a counter to that in a way as well,
Mm.
in that I also remember from school, if I can steal it with another story,
Of course.
it was never a particular teacher, but I remember enjoying, not being necessarily the best at, but enjoying the process of maths and figuring
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
equations and things like that. And it's not that I have a teacher that I remember, but I do often reflect on how lucky I am to have been challenged to think these really complex problems through. And I often now come back to, when I'm in my world of leadership and I'm thinking these complex problems. Gosh, I'm so grateful that at school, even though I can't remember how to calculate, the area of a triangle and stuff exactly like now, I wouldn't know my all of that stuff. But I do know that my brain was in really good training at that time. And I'm so grateful to that. And sometimes I do worry that some schools can lurch a little bit too far the other way to
Yeah.
going, well,
I agree with that.
the content, because I do feel like that was something that was worrying my brain, and exercising it, and has helped me later in the future, even though I can't pinpoint it to a strong feeling or teacher or
Mm.
person.
Yeah,
You know what I
I
mean?
think it's wonderful. Like it's really nice hearing people's reflections of their time at school because we've all been there. And I think it's really wonderful. And for me being a parent now having kids in the system, I think it's just got ever so more important and the amazing role that schools and school leaders play in shaping these amazing communities. Shane, I want to be respectful of your time. And I'm so grateful that we got to have a conversation today.
So
Shane, if you could change one thing about leadership development, what would it be?
So, in the work that I do, it will be unsurprising to think that I think there's quite a lot we can change with leadership development. So it's difficult for me to pick one. But I would the one that I would pick would be that we stop trying to do so much. I think in leadership development, but I think this is also true of a lot of professional development for teachers or for other professions, is we try to achieve far too much with one particular thing. So I'll give you an example. I did some research last year. I interviewed many different leaders who had been on leadership development programs across the world. And I asked them, some of them had been on master's programs. Some of them had done like more like professional qualifications, like in the UK, they have the MPQs, they call them, and some of these kind of professional qualifications. And it was shocking that they said they learned a lot. There was a lot of content there. And then I said, how did it change you as a leader? And nearly every leader struggled to answer that, who I was speaking to. And I thought, gosh,
Wow.
what a shame. These people who have been on 9 months, 1 year, 2 year programs, who may be able to articulate some of the content that they covered, but struggle to actually tell you how it actually changed them and developed them as a leader in their practice. Now, I think there's many reasons for this, but one of the biggest reasons is I think these programs have far too much in and they try to teach you too much. And the irony of it in education is that we know this doesn't work for our students. We don't try cognitively overload our students. You take it bit by bit, you scaffold it, and you teach something. You allow a student to make it theirs. You allow them to practice it over and over again and to personalize it. And yet, in many leadership development, we try to just cover too much. So I think there is a huge place for simplifying here and bringing that down to some core components. At the minute, I'm really lucky to be working with a couple. I finished a cohort a few months ago, starting another one in September with a small group of leaders. The idea being, in 3 months together, what if we just focused on 10 small changes we could make? 10
Mm,
small changes. And I don't really mean small changes, like how you open a meeting really well, or how you make an ask of somebody really clearly. What if we could master 10 little things and we won't just teach it, but we practice it, we personalize it, we get feedback on it? Would learning 10 small things have a bigger impact in our practice than
mm,
learning 100 big, research,
mm,
big ideas that have no impact? I'm really passionate and fascinated by that in a minute.
mm. I think that's really incredible. Are you still taking bookings for that September cohort?
Oh yeah, always taking bookings. So we keep it a small cohort, so it's just a
Yeah.
few places. But yeah, it's called like you can find it like my organization is called Education Leaders. So educationleaders.co/intensive. It's called an intensive program because that's what it is. And the
Yeah.
beautiful thing about it, is that there's no essays, there's none of that comment on two forum posts every month or whatever it is. I've stripped out all the stuff
I love
that
them.
might be nice to do, but is not practical and really focused on let's meet every week. Let's learn a few ideas together. Let's get feedback on it. Let's practice, practice, practice. And so that at the end of just 10 sessions together and a bit of reflection time, you go, do you know what? At the end of that program, I'm a better leader.
Mm.
That should be the aim of every program. I don't
Yeah.
understand why it isn't.
That's so wonderful. Shane, thank you. Thank you for having a conversation with me. Your passion and your enthusiasm for our profession it's really wonderful and really refreshing to see. Please keep up the work that you're doing because we desperately need people like you helping to support and to build the capacity of leaders. So I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me today. Thank you.
Well, likewise, my friend, and all of those messages, the same to you.
Thank you so much.